Hey everyone, it's Soul here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I shouldn't like this game. Resident Evil's Code Veronica is the oldest Resident Evil game that we've played to date on the channel, as it came out back in the year 2000. With its release being about 2 years prior to the Resident Evil remake and the release of Resident Evil 0, which brought forward this new style to the series, Resident Evil Code Veronica in a lot of ways marks the end of the original series. But sadly, it is the only game from that early time period that has yet to be remade, making it a very unique entry into our Resident Evil playthrough on this channel. Due to its age alone, there should be so many reasons that I despise this game. I should honestly hate it with every single bone in my body, and yet I can't help but look back at this game with a smile. Am I crazy for that? Probably. But despite all of the challenges this game poses, the wackiness of this game, the goofiness of the characters, the over-the-top dramatic music, and so many other things made me really enjoy this game and has caused it to gain a special place within my heart. With this game having an average playtime of about 15 hours for a blind playthrough, and with mine taking nearly 23 hours long, there's a lot to break down here. So without further ado, let's discuss the charmingly chaotic and goofy game that is Resident Evil's Code Veronica. Before we jump in though, please remember to hit that like button, click subscribe to see more videos from me, follow me over on Twitch, and leave a comment down below. Here is your one and only warning that this video contains spoilers. Alright, grab your sibling, fix your wigs, and let's fly into it. Going into Resident Evil Code Veronica, I only had negative preconceptions here. All I heard about this game was that it was rough, it's not great, and it's very dated. And the second we jumped into this game, its age was immediately apparent with the drastic drop in graphics compared to that of Resident Evil 0, which we had finished previously. Now, I talked a lot about the graphics in the Resident Evil remake because I was so surprised that a game from 2002 looked and held up as good as it did. This then sent me down the rabbit hole of game graphics and designs here, where I went on to learn that the amazing and outstanding detail and depth in these backgrounds is due to the usage of 2D rendered backgrounds instead of 3D animated ones that they were using in everything that came before. This not only allowed a lot more detail within the backgrounds themselves, but also allowed for the 3D character models to look that much better due to the extra rendering and storage space. And stepping into Code Veronica here, it's very apparent as to why these added details were needed, because these backgrounds, they're a bit empty. Now listen, I have to say, for a game that is 25 years old, the cutscenes still hold up really well, the characters are walking fairly smoothly, it's not that choppy, it's pretty believable, and I'm not just trying to bash the game's graphics because they're old. But there was an unexpected challenge that these older graphics caused, which was my lack of immersion in this game and the world because of the lack of detail. I've been absolutely spoiled with modern day gaming because of how realistic and immersive all of those games are. So trying to step back in time here was definitely a bit of a challenge for me. And since I found myself less immersed than I usually would be, I ended up taking the game and the story a bit more lighthearted and less serious, and I felt myself keeping the game at a bit of a distance, always at arm's length away. However, the graphics themselves weren't the only thing keeping me at bay, because I was struggling to captain this ship. Seriously, the controls of this game were tough. For the first time ever, I had to navigate through tank controls, and while I've heard the term over years and years, and I've played characters that are quote-unquote built like tanks, moving slower, it can take more hits and more damage, this is the first time that I had to play true, authentic tank controls, and let me just say, it was awful. Now, I'm sure those of you that grew up playing video games would be able to switch back and forth at the drop of a dime between the styles of modern controls and classic tank controls here, but for me, it was tough, so let's just say I'm quite grateful that we started out in an enemy-free area. With these aggravating controls and the lack of immersion that I was feeling in this game, the first couple hours was really difficult. And you add that together with the fact that the game threw me the dreaded zombie dogs, I was just not having a great time, and it's one of those moments that I find myself saying, I don't think I would have continued playing this game if I wasn't on livestream. But there was one thing that the game did right, despite all of my struggles that I was feeling in these first few hours here, and that was the introduction to the best side character possibly ever in any Resident Evil game here, which was Steve Burnside.
Wah! Wait, don't shoot!
Who are you?
Huh? You're not a zombie. Well, great. Wait right there. I'm coming over. Sorry about that little misunderstanding, but I thought you were another one of those
Shut up. Make one wrong move and I'll shoot.
In all of his silly, sorry glory here, he ended up capturing my interest as he runs off, leaving us with the lingering questions of who is he and what is he doing on this island. Steve is actually a pretty interesting character to me because he's really just there to provide comedic relief and add a little bit of character and motivation to drive the story forward. However, despite him being a big emotional pull in this tale, he's only one of the many moving pieces in this story that the overarching plot has to offer. Claire Redfield, in search for her brother Chris after the events of Resident Evil 2, ends up getting captured and taken to a mysterious island owned by Umbrella. It's here that in the midst of a bioweapons attack, Claire ends up meeting Steve before the two of them work together to escape the island while avoiding the enemies of the confusing Ashford siblings and none other than Whesker himself. As our pair eventually escape, their plane is suddenly controlled by Alfred Ashford, who redirects their flight to his family's secret Antarctic base. It's there that Steve and Claire are both captured, before we suddenly cut over to Chris Redfield's side of the story and we see him searching the island for Claire, before he ends up fighting Whesker, or in my case, trying your best to avoid him as much as possible, before finding a way to the Antarctic base to save his sister. The plan sadly goes a bit wrong, and Steve's story comes to a tragic end, but with Claire and Chris working together, they go on to defeat the Ashford siblings, and they go on to stop Whesker, at least for right now, before, after 3 long games apart here, Chris and Claire are finally reunited, safe at last.
Yeah, it's payback time. We've got to destroy Umbrella. Now. Let's finish this once and for all!
The story is simple, effective, and quite plain when you're looking at it in this overarching breakdown. However, don't you worry, because the characters bring a lot of fun and wackiness to this story.
Welcome, Claire!
All of these side characters are equally dramatic, silly, and they're frankly the main reason that I ended up enjoying this game. The over-the-top voice acting here is just the cherry on top to these cheesy characters. It honestly is really fantastic, but of course, my personal favorite is Steve Burnside himself. The first and main role that Steve has in this story is to firstly provide comedic relief.
Don't worry, Claire. Your knight in shining armor is here.
He's cheesy, he's over the top, so much so that a lot of people dislike him as a character. However, I personally liked the overdramatic cheesiness that he provides. The second important role, though, is that he drives the current plotline of events forward, because every single time we see Steve, he either fills us in on what we have to do next, or he triggers a new event to occur that pushes us and progresses the story further. So having Steve there was an absolute blessing during the dark parts of this game. But aside from just being there for comedy or relief, Steve as a character, his story is actually a bit of a nice contrast to have against these complicated enemies because his story is so simplistic and easy to follow. Steve is predictable, he's childish, he's lashing out like a moody teenager because he is a moody teenager. What you see is what you get with Steve here, and that is something that is so nice to see in this game because of how it balances out everything else that's going on. Yet while his story is very simplistic, I have to point out the fact that he actually gets a true, full, and complete character arc, which is honestly quite rare for side characters in the Resident Evil series. Watching Steve start off as someone who doesn't trust anyone so much so that he tries to convince Claire to not trust Leon and to doubt her own brother, and to then see him have no gratitude at all when Claire saves his life from the Golden Luger's booby trap. We then go on to see him lash out at the question of his distrust before we see him ultimately break down when he's confronted by his past. It's all just such a nice progression in his story that had me really hooked during every single one of his scenes and carried me over through some of the worst moments of the gameplay here. There is so much backtracking that I had to actually look up a walkthrough online for this game because I wanted to keep the story moving. I got really sick and tired of ending up on the other side of the map, perhaps in the training facilities, and then having to head back to the initial starting area just to find one piece to the puzzle in one other area back at the submarine base. The running around is frankly quite annoying and frustrating at times here. Not to mention the enemies in between these different areas made this even worse, and I was severely struggling with resources. So yes, I used a walkthrough to get through this because I would have lost my mind if I didn't see Steve every hour or so. But even after this, after finding out that Steve this entire time has been grappling with the betrayal from his father, resulting in his mother's death and his own imprisonment under Umbrella here, the writers really decided that Steve would get a full character arc, because he not only goes on to trust Claire as the two of them go on to work together to get off of this island and to later try and escape the Antarctic base together, we then go on to get him sacrificing his life for Claire. The most selfless act from someone who started off so incredibly selfish. It is just so simple and so effective. I absolutely love Steve's story. But to make matters even worse, the writers really decided to twist the knife at the very end of Steve's story because he doesn't just sacrifice his life for Claire. He goes on to fight against the T. Veronica virus that has infused in his blood and transformed him into this creature in order to save her life. I mean, come on, man. Steve's story is so tragically good. I love every single thing to it. And now I know the romance between these two characters is, yes, a bit forced. There are times, especially at the cutscenes on the plane before they arrive at the Antarctic base, that this story kind of starts to feel a little bit weird. But that being said, the romance does make a lot of sense. Claire is this great girl that has taught Steve to be a better person, so this idea that he is sort of romantically infatuated with her isn't that weird. It is something though that I do think they can work out to be a bit better and more natural if they do a remake of it.
Thanks.
Plane's trashed.
So I know Steve Burnside is not everyone's favorite character, but the fact that he brings much needed relief to the aggravating sections of gameplay, the fact that his story is so simplistic and easy to follow compared to the chaos that's occurring with the other characters, the fact that he has a complete and true character arc, and the fact that he has such a memorable and tragic end to his story just makes him a huge highlight for me and one of the best things this game has to offer. But now, from one of the best things this game has to offer, we move on to probably the most confusing part to this story, the Ashford siblings. The first time we're actually introduced to these characters is through a very strange video clip of them as kids that just sort of made my brain question. And I know I'm not the only one who is thinking this because it's one of the first things that you find when you look up this game, because the relationship between these siblings definitely comes across as a bit weird. I don't know what the writer's intention was with the sort of underlying tone. I don't know if it was on purpose or on accident, but from my standpoint, it definitely seems to be on purpose, and it just sort of adds a bit of a strange feeling to most of the game. To make things even more confusing though, after this very dramatic introduction to Alfred Ashford, where he basically explains and name drops everyone important in his story and in his family,
My grandfather is one of the original founders of Umbrella Inc.
the game then decides to double down on this very strange video here, as it's played once more in order to unlock the hidden door that leads us to the private residence. It's here that we finally get the first introduction to Alexia Ashford, as we go on to see that she is the one sort of controlling all of the movements on this island. She's the one bossing around her brother, despite our first impression that Alfred is the one in charge. However, despite all of this sounding quite normal through these cutscenes, if you read all of the notes that you find in the palace and the residence, things start to get very confusing. The letters that we find in the palace seem to imply that no one has seen Alexia in person for years. But when we get to the residence, we also go on to see not only her in person, but we read letters that are between these two siblings, implying that Alexia is certainly around. It's in these notes that we also get the confirmation that Alfred does not want to be head of the family, and Alexia does. So how is it that no one else has seen her despite a passing glance from the window at a distance? Something here is definitely not adding up, and as the game progresses, we end up finding the secret room above the twins' bedrooms, where we get another letter that is very confusing, leaning into that awkward feeling between these siblings. Those of you that played this will probably know what I'm talking about here. Those accomplishments will be the proof of my love toward I'm sorry, hold up. Aren't you siblings? Proof of my love towards Alexia. But after we leave this area, it's then that we discover that Alfred Ashford has been dressing up as his sister this whole time.
What? No!
And presumably also writing those letters. I'm sorry, what the heck is happening? Now, I was
Wait a
severely
second.
confused, and I
What
know
just
I'm not the
happened?
only one. I have no idea, Steve.
So-
Claire and Steve are also equally confused as well. And between this, him dressing up as his sister, and those strange videos of them as kids, I was completely lost, and I was starting to think maybe it's some sort of split personality or something, but then it couldn't be split personality because we see both of them on the video clip. So I was just completely baffled by this. And I started to try and fill in the blanks in my mind just to try and get one up on the game and try and guess the story before it happened. It's a bad habit to have, I'll admit. But because of that, the story was just so intriguing and confusing, and I loved it. It's so stupid, it's so wacky, it's not well written at all. But the sheer absurdity of this story and just, again, the overacting with these voice actors made this silly, goofy, and just stupidly enjoyable. Alfred goes on to speak in Alexia's tone of voice despite dressing up as Alfred, and it was just starting to get so silly as we got to the moment that Claire and Steve are escaping the island that for a brief moment I actually thought this might be the end. But then I soon realized there was way too many unopened doors in this island, so many places we haven't yet explored, that it couldn't possibly be the end. Not to mention the obvious lack of an explanation for whatever the heck Alfred is doing. Now, there is one major downside to the Ashford siblings story, which is the fact that you have to do so much reading in order to understand things, especially moving forward into this hidden base. It's here that we find so many answers to our questions, hidden in diary entries, notes, butler's letters, and so much more, that if you're someone that tends to glance over a lot of the reading, you will definitely miss out on a thorough explanation as to what has happened here. When you play as Claire, it's there that you learn that the Ashford family's success hinders on the edge of this progenitor research known as the T. Veronica virus that is created in honor of their family's founder, Veronica Ashford. Just like all of the other heads of the Umbrella Corporation, the Ashford family has been doing their own strand of progenitor research here, as they went on to mix it with the DNA of ants in order to create this Veronica virus. Yet, we also go on to learn that Alexander Ashford, the siblings' father and the son of Edward Ashford, one of the 3 founders of the Umbrella Corporation, went on to become the first human test subject for this new Veronica virus, which sadly resulted in him transforming into this creature nicknamed Nosferatu. As we learn about Nosferatu's existence and what happened to Alexander Ashford, we also go on to learn about some sort of accident that happened 10 years ago, taking away Alexia Ashford as well. The puzzle pieces were starting to come together here, as we see that Alfred has been struggling with the loss of not only his father, but also his sister. I won't lie, I felt just a little bit of sympathy towards Alfred here because of the loss of both of his family members. I will also admit that I really enjoyed the addition of a new enemy here. After being on the island and dealing with your standard tyrants, and the addition of the Bandersnatches, which, while they're new, didn't really seem that different from a regular tyrant or just a different bioweapon or something, it was nice to have an enemy that had a sort of fear around him. Not to mention, of course, with a name like Nosferatu, it invokes a feeling of deep horror relating to this creature. And when that boss fight arrived between Claire, Steve, and Nosferatu, I was definitely terrified, but that's also because I was just out of resources like usual and had to then backtrack and load into an earlier save to make sure I reserved enough of my ammo. Yet, as Steve and Claire face Alfred once more, Steve is actually able to get in a fatal blow before the two of them are finally able to escape the Antarctic base, only for Alexia Ashford to be released by Alfred from her cryogenic sleep and attack and knock out Claire and Steve. If you were paying close enough attention to those notes, we go on to discover that Alexia Ashford injected herself with the T. Veronica virus and put herself into a state of hibernation in order to be prepared for the full power and control that this virus allows. Watching Alfred crawl to his sister as he is bleeding out on the ground, dying in her arms after she's been released for the first time in 10 years,
Alexia.
There is something very tragic and almost Shakespearean about this scene here that, again, while over the top, oddly worked really well in this story. It's a weird game, and I feel like it's worth pointing out here that this sort of campiness and the over-the-top acting is not going to be for everyone, but even though I was thoroughly confused at this moment, having read some notes and missed a few others, I still loved every second of these cheesy dramatic scenes. In the moment, though, I was absolutely baffled, as some of these notes we don't find until we play as Chris later on, and with this scene we get proof that Alexia Ashford isn't just a figment of Alfred's imagination. She isn't just a sister that died 10 years ago. She is alive, and with Alfred's passing, she now becomes the main enemy to this story. As we jump to Chris Redfield's side of the story, I didn't want to leave this mystery of these siblings behind. I was finally starting to catch up with the events that were unfolding. I was finally starting to get a piece of the picture together in my mind, and then the game decides to string us along a little bit by getting us sent back to the island as Chris. It was a bit frustrating playing Chris's section. We do get a slight bit of clarification and confirmation as to what was told about the Ashford siblings back at the base by finding some new notes about the Ashford family in these locked rooms. However, since we're not learning too much else about the Ashford family, I just sort of wanted to get through this quite quickly. I also just wanted to get back to Claire and Steve. So despite the addition of Whesker being reintroduced as an enemy, which we will talk about a little bit more, I was just eager to get back to the mystery of the Ashford siblings. Despite my eagerness to go and see the Ashford siblings, to get back to the base and face them directly, I wouldn't have to wait much longer after Chris arrives at the Antarctic base, because it's there that we go on to face Alexia Ashford in person for the first time ever. The real Alexia Ashford, not Alfred dressed up as her. She is here in front of us in her T. Veronica virus powers as we go forth searching around this base, solving all of the puzzles in a desperate attempt to try and save Claire. Despite this great entrance here, despite the addition of a terrifyingly large spider boss fight thing, or again, just sort of running away from it if you're like me, we have a lengthier section of gameplay and puzzles where we once again have to sort of wander around room to room in order to find all of the pieces necessary to progress the story. Now, I'll admit, I think in the later part of this gameplay, I started to get a bit tired of the actual gameplay sections because the cutscenes were actually starting to get really good. Things were starting to make sense. There was developments happening between Claire and Steve and Alexia and Alfred, and I was just thoroughly enjoying the story at this point that I just didn't necessarily want to deal with the nuisance of the gameplay. It wasn't nearly as lengthy and annoying as some of the sections of gameplay or the softlock moments from earlier. However, it was just getting a bit tiresome at this point more than anything, but the game does try and do a good job here with keeping you on your toes because they throw in some new tasks and challenges. In particular, trying to avoid the security cameras I thought was a nice way to shake things up a little bit. Don't you dare. Don't you dare, Chris. Dodge it. Chris! Why would you stand there like an idiot? So after a little bit more time than what I would have hoped, Chris ends up finding Claire and cutting her out of this sort of webbed infectious prison here. Before, after this very brief reunion, the pair are then separated once more. Oh, screw
It's
you,
Alexia.
Alexia.
Alexia? There really is an Alexia?
Oh wait, Claire's like, oh, there's actually one?
Almost time, you genetically
Oh.
inferior siblings.
I need your jewel. No! Frick. Oh god, not snakes. I can't. Claire? Chris? Everyone alive?
Chris!
Oh, his legs are broken? No! Steve!
Just go. I'll be fine.
But Chris!
You've got to save Steve. Go!
With Steve's cry being heard in the distance, this is the moment that Claire goes forward and the tragedy and end to Steve's story occurs. But while all of that is happening, Chris is forced to face the T. Veronica virus's full power as Alexia and Whesker confront each other before Chris is forced to fight Alexia on his own. Oh, Whesker, don't you have superhuman powers now? Oh, I like this soundtrack. Oh, I like this song.
You're coming with me.
Oh! Okay, Whesker. So she's got fire powers? She's a firebender?
Chris! Whesker.
Okay. Sure. Can I run?
Chris,
I
since
have
you're
to
one
fight
of
her?
my best men, I'll let you handle this.
I'm not part of your team anymore, Whesker. I don't know if you know this, but you tried to kill us. With this being only the beginning of the show of power that she has, we face her in her fiery wrath here. Before, if you were able to dodge all of her attacks, you deal enough damage to knock her out. But of course, in the moment, I was hoping that that would be it. We would never see her again. She was truly dead. But sadly, in the world of Resident Evil, that is rarely the case. Oh, never mind, she's not dead. As Chris and Claire trigger the self-destruct alarm in order to free Claire from this locked prison door, Alexia comes out from the woodwork in her full mutated form as Chris fights her off in order to try and let Claire escape. With her now forming even more with the sort of ant DNA, we get these insect-like mutations getting thrown at us as she continues to transform into this disgusting mutation here. Before, after quite a lengthy fight, and where once again I was struggling with resources, Alexia is finally defeated once and for all. Woo! Oh, heck yeah! Oh, heck yeah! Oh, heck yeah! Go, Chris! We gotta get you a blue herb stat! The Ashford siblings story is obviously very confusing and has quite a few issues with it. The first and main one being, what the heck is with the tone that they set up in the beginning? It's very confusing. I don't know why the writers did this. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it's definitely something that they would have to sort of reshape and rework if they put out a remake. The fact that so many people online seem to think all of this just shows how weird their relationship is, and not to mention the previously mentioned issue of the fact that their story is hidden within the notes. It's not always a good thing to have the character's full story be revealed in notes because of the fact that there are players out there that just don't read every single note that they find. As someone that really tries to read all of the notes, there are times in these games where I find myself reading but not fully understanding and registering the information that's within them. And with this story being so confusing, the fact that it's hidden in these notes makes it even more confusing for first-time players. So that is something that I also think could be worked on and polished off a little bit more in the remake. Which I know that it's going to be tough for the company to put out a remake for this game, but I really hope that they do, because I personally really enjoyed this game. Even though these characters are so confusing, I was baffled by what the heck they were doing. I kinda like their story. I think the fact that Alfred is so desperate to make sure that the family's mission succeeds is admirable, even though, yes, he is the villain. I like the twist that we think Alexia is dead based on this letter that we find from the butler, but then we go on to find out she's actually been in this sort of hibernation state. We also, of course, have the implied foil of the Ashford siblings versus the Redfield siblings. That's something that I think they could lean into a little bit more in the story when they go forward with a remake, which again, fingers crossed they do. Right now, we don't really have enough information about Chris and Claire's relationship for it to be an effective foil, at least in my opinion here, aside from the fact that you just have a pair of siblings that are evil and a pair of siblings that are good. Their personalities aren't really emphasized enough for this to be an effective character foil, but there is something there in the foundation that could definitely be expanded upon in a remake. But I will say, I do hope they keep the music, because the overdramatic music was something that I really loved, and I want to give an extra little shout out here to the composers for this score, because I thoroughly enjoyed how it added to the overall cheesy tone that this game creates. But with all of that said about these wacky Ashford siblings, we have one final villain to talk about here, which is none other than Albert Whesker himself. Somehow, despite a whole building and secret laboratory falling on him at the end of Resident Evil, despite getting sliced in half by this tyrant, Albert Wesker is somehow alive. It's made immediately clear through his lizard-like eyes and his speed and agility in his confrontational moment with Claire here, that he has indeed absorbed all of those mysterious viruses being researched back at the mansion, resulting in these unique powers. In this dramatic return for Wesker to the Resident Evil series, revealing that he is alive and terrifying, we see that he is actually surprised to see Claire on the island.
I was the one who attacked this island. Who'd have thought you'd be hanging about? All the better for me. Now that the cat dragged in this nice surprise, your ever so caring brother will definitely show up. I must thank you for being such good bait.
He has not been tracking down Chris. He does not care about Claire. He is at the island because he is after the secret research for the T. Veronica virus. And while we don't get to learn all of that in this moment here, we do learn that he is the one initially attacking it. Yet, despite Wesker's major reintroduction to the series here, he then disappears for almost the entirety of Claire's part of the story, where we go on to eventually see his return when Chris arrives at the island. As this rivalry between Chris and Wesker is only just beginning during this brief fight, Alexia tunes in on the cameras, distracting Wesker long enough for Chris to make his escape. Chris, you gonna do something here?
Alexia?
Oh, but of course, only if you're able to outrun the tyrant, because otherwise you have to fight it. But, of course, as I do on this channel, we ran immediately for the door. No, I don't have the freaking ammo for this! Run! I really liked this scene between Wesker and Alexia. It's very brief, but we see that there is a lot of history between these two characters, which is actually then confirmed within Resident Evil 0, stating how both Birkin and Wesker grew up under the training of the Umbrella Corporation, and with the Ashford siblings being the grandchildren of one of the three founders, it makes a lot of sense that these characters would know about each other. I also found myself wondering, did Whesker even know Alexia was alive, or is he one of the many people that assumed she died? Even though it's never really confirmed, at least not in these games, I kinda like the idea of Birkin, Whesker, and the Ashford siblings all being just kids growing up together, only for all of this tragedy and terror to happen later on. It's almost like they're all siblings that are lashing out against their parents, trying to prove which one is the smarter one. And sadly, Whesker appears to take the cake, because as we move forward into the Antarctic base, we see him after the research for the T. Veronica virus, and with Chris defeating Alexia Ashford, Whesker makes his full appearance at the end of the game, revealing that he has gotten a sample through Steve.
Sorry to disappoint you, but Alexia is gone.
That's no longer a concern to me. I have Steve to work with.
What?
Steve.
In his body, there's still a living T. Alexia virus. Steve should be a good specimen. Maybe he'll come back alive, just as I did, and be able to see your sister again.
As we all know, Steve was injected with the T. Veronica virus and mutated immediately before we eventually see him dying to save Claire. However, there is a sort of fun fan theory online that Steve is actually alive and well, just taken captive by Whesker here in his mutated form. However, me personally, I believe that Whesker just most likely took a sample of Steve's blood, but I thought it was a fun theory and worth pointing out. But either way, whether he's alive or not, Whesker still has this sample of the T. Veronica virus, and Chris, eager to stop him, tries his best to fight him, only for Whesker to flee the scene.
Today's your lucky day. Next time we meet, don't count on another.
Next time.
Until we meet again.
I was so nervous to fight Whesker here. I had no ammo left over from the fight with Alexia, but thankfully the game throws us this cutscene instead as we see Whesker flee the scene after this very brief fight. And honestly, I was very surprised to find out that we don't get a true resolution to this disagreement. Whesker escapes with the virus, and while it's shocking to see our heroes drop the ball like this, I actually really like that the story ends on this sort of dark and ominous tone with Whesker escaping. Not to mention, since I'm making this in hindsight, moving forward into the Resident Evil series, the fact that Whesker does appear in Resident Evil 5, I think this is a great introduction for the return of his character, and I wish that this game got a remake immediately so that more people could see Wesker's true return. But his dramatic return isn't the only thing that's great about his addition in this story, because him being there, his character, he strikes so much fear into this story that is otherwise so goofy and adds a darker level of evil to the enemies in this game. Let's face it, the Ashford siblings are definitely a bit silly, they're over the top, and it's quite difficult to take them seriously sometimes. But Whesker being there, the fact that he essentially crawled out of the pits of hell to make this dramatic return, and the fact that he now has powers that makes him 10 times more terrifying to fight against, he really added that much needed level of fear to our enemies and balanced out all of the goofiness of the Ashford siblings. Not to mention, Whesker becoming a more prominent enemy towards the end also justifies us playing as Chris, because that was something that caught me completely off guard. I just assumed we would play as Claire and perhaps as Steve as the game went on, so playing as Chris towards the end made me really surprised. But with this rivalry between the two characters, it made total sense by the end of it. Despite this story being overall very wacky, I really like how this fits and flows into the rest of the games. I honestly think more people should play Resident Evil's Code Veronica because aside from the story being pretty decent and definitely keeping you intrigued, the game is just fun. This game is just silly, it's crazy, it's over the top, it's dramatic, and I just had a laugh throughout most of it. However, on the other hand, I also completely understand why people quit the game about an hour through, because of all the endless backtracking and tedious puzzles that occur in this game. It is definitely a major deterrent from this game, which is a shame, because as I've said, I personally enjoyed the story, despite all of the craziness that it throws at you. I really hope that they're working on a remake for this game, because I think there's so much potential within this fun, goofy story. But they of course have to get rid of all of that unnecessary backtracking and fine-tune some of the aspects to these characters. I would love to see more between Chris and Claire. I would love to see more between Whesker and Chris. I think there's so many great opportunities here, not to mention getting to know Claire as a character a bit more after the events of Resident Evil 2, and with the potential of her having this love interest in Steve, I think it just all opens so many great doors of expansion within the world of Resident Evil's remakes. But of course, that is just my opinion. So as always, let me know all of your guys' thoughts about this down below, because I can't be the only one wanting more of these wacky side characters. So yes, Resident Evil's Code Veronica, I should probably hate on a technical level, because of how old the controls are that I'm just not used to, because of how dated the graphics are, and yes, because of how dated and careless this story is at times, leading to a more goofy feeling rather than one that's grounded in reality like some of the characters and stories that we've played so far. But it's that wackiness, the over-the-top characters, the goofiness of these side characters, the craziness of this story, and yes, the dated graphics and controls themselves that create this charm around Resident Evil's Code Veronica that I thoroughly enjoyed. So if you made it this far in the video, let me know by leaving a little airplane emoji down below because of the dreaded airplane boss fight that set me back 2.5 hours because I had to load an earlier save and replay sections to make sure I had enough ammo to even have a chance to survive this thing, which I eventually just got lucky at. It was awful overall, so leave a little airplane emoji for my struggles. If you guys like my discussion, please hit that like button down below, and of course, leave all of your thoughts in the comment section. While you guys are down there, click subscribe to see more videos from me, and turn on notifications if you want to be notified whenever I post a new video. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you future souls next time. Bye, guys!